This totally makes me crazy. I keep telling her, make him fix it.
You know, I did.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah, that's, it's not in this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's. Right. No. Yes. That's part of
Move back. Yeah, it's going there.
Man, I missed you. I was kind of wondering, when like.
Sorry, now,
Yeah.
what now?
A little bit. Oh, you gotta sit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, man.
yes,
What are you doing?
yeah, I'll just do that right.
Little
away, and I'll read
I'm
all-
thinking let's put like a little fire pit.
Based on our previous email chain
Um,
exchange, I'd like to remove these two items.
Yeah,
And then if you would make them.
I think it needs to be a regular.
Bring it back. Yeah.
How does that end?
Sure.
Okay. So it still fills us in. That's why I said 5. Near until 8. So it gives through.
Yeah, if we can get one more. Or one for every person.
It's like, right, so you can share. Wrap. We need to like swallow the wrap. Oh, shit.
You know, it's really crazy. That's just kind of like,
I'm getting weird exceptions in minutes, so make sure you're recording. We might have to back. Because it's giving me an exception.
There we go. Great. Very good. Yes. You can share. Okay. We have 2:15? We do have 2:15. Good afternoon. I'm Barb Noseworthy, Mayor of Durango, and today is April 4th, 2023. It is 2:15, and this is a study session. Before we call the roll, I will acknowledge that we're starting where Jessica Buell, Councilor Buell is on her way but stuck in traffic. So we'll call the roll, get started, and when she arrives, we'll acknowledge her presence. So may we have a roll call, please?
Counselor Baxter,
Present.
Counselor Bosman's,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Youssef,
Here.
and Mayor Noseworthy.
Present. Also around the table, we have City Manager Jose Madrigal, Interim City Attorney Bill Tuthill, and Assistant City Manager Aaron Hyder. I think I just mispronounced that. Okay, I was good. I got it right. Okay. I'm going to start, as I try to always start out the study sessions and the city council meeting, with a land acknowledgement. This is my statement. It is not a statement on behalf of council. For thousands of years, this region was home to numerous people, bands, tribes, and nations. Each had their distinct culture, artistic expression, and community mores. In particular, this region was the ancestral home of the Nuchu, Dene, Pueblo, Hopi, multiple Apache bands, and various other tribes and Latinx people who used and stewarded this land. I recognize that Indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands by the U.S. government, and it is important to recognize that the narrative of this region has mostly been told from the dominant perspective, without recognition of those who came before us and who to this day continue to thrive, create, and connect with this land. Thank you for your respect in my acknowledging this legacy. Thank you. So today, first on the agenda, we have the Board of Ethics here, and I'm going to invite you up to the table, all of you. There's space, I do believe, for everyone at the table. And that is basically you've been working on. Same for Jessica. There's a space over here. I want to start by thanking you for your service on this board. And
We do need one more.
yeah, we need one
Thank you, Bryce.
for Pat. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna have him go around once Pat's got a seat. Pat, we've got a space right here for you. So I'll start with Jay as our chair and have you go around and introduce yourselves, please. And please do speak into the microphone so anyone listening can try to identify.
And they need to be green to be turned on.
Good afternoon. I'm Jay Egan. I'm Chair of the Board of Ethics for the City of Durango.
I'm Laurie Meininger, the Vice Chair.
David Smith, member of the board.
Pat Hall, member of the board.
Catherine Burgess, member of the board.
Very good. Thank you. I know that for some time you've been working on revisions and recommendations to the Code of Ethics and the Code of Conduct and this process. So Jay, I'm actually going to turn it over to you. We have the materials. I can say that I have read them. It's an expectation that most counselors have prepared in this way, and I printed them out actually so I can make extra notes. But I'll turn it over to you as a preface and have you proceed in the way you wish to share this information with us and your recommendations.
Thank you. I'll allow council
Oh,
a chance to sit down.
may I just, for the record, indicate that Councilor Buell is able now to join us. Thank you. Jay, please proceed.
Good afternoon.
No
Thanks for
worries.
the opportunity. Understanding we have about 45 minutes for this particular part of your agenda today. We've split up a brief presentation. I'm going to handle some background on the ordinance update, and Vice Chair Lori Meininger is going to speak to the Code of Conduct, Council Code of Conduct draft model that we have shared with you that's in the packet. I do have a handout for you, and I gave a copy to the clerk already. If you could pass those around and make sure there's extra copies. So regarding the ordinance update, council held a prior study session on October 18th, and we provided 7 or 8 different topics for your feedback. Based upon the feedback that was received at that session, the draft ordinance update that was in the package that you received implements all those things. So I'm not going to go into those again. Those were all fairly straightforward. I'd say 3 things that we wanted to note that is different or in addition to those conversations from last year. First of all, we've updated some of the definitions. We found some of the definitions like city official and other group names to be confusing because they overlapped. And sometimes when we were trying to implement cases, it became confusing. So we tried to straighten those out, and the prior city attorney, Tony, actually helped us draft those. Second, volunteers are still covered in the ordinance, but working with the city staff, we received feedback as a way to kind of fine tune that particular definition. I think that's still under review with the city staff, and it may need further refinement. But basically, there's a 3-year definition put into the definition now, whereas in the past, all volunteers were covered.
3
And
days.
understanding that board,
3 days.
3 days, I'm sorry, thank you. Yes, 3 days. Understanding that board and commission members are already covered in another definition. So we're talking about other kinds of volunteers. Finally, in section 2-208A6, and that's why I provided this little chart for you. We're proposing that in addition to the 4 options that are present for the ethics board when a matter comes before it, those 4 matters are in the center of this, 4 methods in the center of this, either immediate dismissal through the initial screening process, a mediation process, an investigation process, or a hearing process. We're proposing that the ordinance have a 5th option, which would give the Board of Ethics more flexibility. In other words, other action is deemed appropriate by the board. So what's the reason for that? Well, if you look at this kind of long schematic here, you see to actually get to a dismissal or a finding, but actually either a finding in 2 instances requires us to go through a fairly lengthy process. We've had enough experience that based upon cases we've seen, that there may be instances where we don't have to have a hearing, we don't have to have an investigative process, and that the initial screening process could be sufficient to get to a finding. And so we've added that 5th item as a potential change to the ordinance. So that's my presentation on the ordinance. I'd like to suggest that we go ahead to Lori and let her talk about the code of conduct, and then open it up to further dialogue as you see fit.
That sounds very good. Thank you, Jay. Lori, please share with us your information and thoughts.
Thanks, everyone. So you've confessed that you've read what we sent you. Thank you very much for that. We're assuming that everyone has, so thank you all very much for that. I wanted to just preface talking about this proposed code of conduct for the council with just a little bit of background. This came up out of the discussions that we've been having now for over a year about how to separate out the code of conduct from the code of ethics. And in doing so, what does that mean? And obviously back in October, there were some questions that you all had about what does that mean specifically for council? So we took a look at several different documents across similarly structured and sized cities in the state of Colorado and elsewhere, looked at some other resources in Colorado. And I want to just do a particular shout out to Suzanne Sitter, who did an immense amount of research on our behalf and helping us gather some of that initial data. I'm sure that when you looked at this, you went, wait a minute, this isn't step by step telling us what to do, and it's not. And that's intentional on our part. We did not take the position that we were going to prescribe for you all, for City Council, what it should do, but rather give you an outline, some guardrails, if you will, some guidelines, some guidance gained from other cities and other city councils, and highlight important aspects of that. As I said, we didn't approach it like we're going to tell you what to do, but rather tried to base it on both the current city codes, the code of conduct in particular, work that council's already done in terms of establishing a set of expected behaviors for city council members, and then align that with what already exists within the code. The one exception that I would say to that is that we did, and you've seen, we've included some recommended guidance on conduct and social media, because that's not specifically spelled out in the current ordinance. So looking at the existing organizational structure of council, both in terms of how it's delineated in the charter and in ordinance, and then also just its relationship with other city officials and city staff, we've come up with this set of recommendations as guidelines, with the assumption that council would then do the work of fleshing out some of the specifics based on your experience or council's experience in self-governing. Council is a self-governing board, so we didn't want to presume to tell council in detail what to do. You'll see, you notice that there are listed a series of disciplinary actions, including sanctions, and those are in alignment with what is existing already. Just as our recommendations for the revisions that Jay just highlighted again in terms of the code, staff-related matters would be the purview of the city manager. And since you all, again, have expressed your desire to have a mechanism to self-manage, we just drafted this with that in mind, giving some teeth for council to enforce the code as a self-governing body. And then obviously issues around ethics would remain with the Board of Ethics. So to be clear, we're not talking about that. We're talking about issues of conduct. So I'm happy to walk through quickly I'm guessing you all have some questions. So whatever works for you in terms of how you would like to work through the document, I'm happy to do.
Lori, I thought the only other thing you might want to mention was the intention was that the complaint form that already exists and is modified through the ordinance update would still continue to exist.
Correct.
And then the process would be for either one of these to have that complaint form come in, and the Board of Ethics still serve in a kind of a quick screening function to make sure it goes on the right track to wherever it needs to go, the city manager to council, or stay with the Board of Ethics.
That would be true for any complaint that's filed.
Correct.
Council, do you have a preference? Would you prefer to hear Lori go through it point by point or jumping immediately into questions?
And maybe we could even have council comments and then see where we
Yeah,
go from there.
That'd be good. That'd be good. Thank you. I'll open it up for comments and/or questions.
Well, I'll go ahead and
I
Jump
see
in.
you have some notes, so I was going to call on Counselor
I just have a
Baxter.
few notes. Thank you so much for doing this work, and I really appreciate the conversation we had in October. A lot has happened since then, more experience with this issue since then. So I think there's more to discuss than there was in October. One of the challenges that I see, and we actually had this conversation, council did, I don't remember the exact date, I believe it was in February, when we were talking about conduct among city councilors. And one of the challenges for me, under the code of conduct conversation, having council manage it, is, well, there's a couple of them. If you listen to that meeting, you hear that councilors were concerned that they would be serving a number of years in the future with a counselor that they might feel has a conduct issue, and didn't want to do that because they needed to be able to have a good working relationship with them. And I think that's a concern. I think it's going to be challenging for councils to censor their own council member. It's like being the judge and the jury at the same time, as well as the prosecutor and the defense attorney. So, and if council feels that way, then they already feel that way. So how can they be unbiased and independent in the conversation when it's had? So that's one of my concerns with having it be at a council level without some other type of assistance there.
Would you like to get feedback from the Board of Ethics on their thoughts on that?
Sure.
Any
So-
suggestions for
yeah.
ways of handling that?
So the premise of how this was drafted, much like the guidance or the processes laid out with existing ordinance, it's based on a presumption of there being a complaint. Which is, I think in my mind, in our mind, different than the collegial management, self-governing that all bodies need to engage in. What's written in this is this idea of enforcement. So we lay out, so here's some parameters for what the conduct should look like. Violations of that then would trigger some next steps. So if you look at it, and we ourselves have had conversation around this, whether this is the right way to go forward. But it lays out, what the process would be to address a complaint by someone against a particular member. And it would depend on to whom the complaint is filed against as to how it would be addressed. So that said, this also presumes that the city manager and the city attorney are resources available to city council. And so it would, so for example, it says in here, complaints made by members of the public or made by council members would be reported to the city manager or city attorney. So it gives you some additional resource, gives council some additional resources without assuming that you're going to file complaints against one another and have to figure out how to handle that. We're trying to give resources to council in order to be able to have council have some additional minds, thoughts, help with decision-making on how to do that. It's not a perfect answer.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Or
Please, go ahead.
Okay, on that issue and on that topic, code of conduct being handled by city manager or city council themselves, basically policing our own selves. And the decision has, you've kind of come forward as a board to that conclusion. Can you tell me again why? And, is it? Okay.
It was from this booklet, which I believe you referred to. I think you might have a different version of it, but it was given to me when I first joined the Board of Ethics.
I've never seen that.
It's a CML document. Yeah.
Anyway, It says, govern yourselves before governing others. Carver is the author of this book, which this booklet recommends, and I'm going to donate this to the city. So it will be available to you. Carver recommends that the governing body take the time to design and codify its own processes, including a board member code of conduct. Anyone who's experienced dysfunctional behavior within a governing body knows that negative interpersonal dynamics can destroy the governing body's effectiveness as well as its credibility with its constituents. But how can a board deal with inappropriate behavior among its own if it hasn't first determined what constitutes inappropriate behavior? So I think the premise behind this is that the board to have a buy-in, to get everyone to buy into its processes and what the conduct should be, that they first get together and write their own conduct. And this maybe should happen after every election cycle, that each board writes its own, approves its own, and then you can point to the fact that this is in something which you have bought into yourself when you join this board.
It sounds like you're saying it needs to be specific rather than just be nice to each other.
Well,
It needs to have some very specific premises about what you can and cannot do or should and should not do.
I think the premise is that it would be up to you to decide, because you were the ones that have to deal with each other. And again, if everybody buys into it, whether specific or general, those conversations could be had before something comes up.
And I see you've kind of started that
Correct.
potentially in this code of conduct with the social media discussion and participation in boards, commissions, and committees and reporting requirements. So you're starting to outline that.
That was our idea, that what we should do is give you some guidance about how you might go about this, but we think this recommendation stands out. And again, I'm willing to give up this book, which I have just had the time, it just arrived actually recently. It has some excellent examples in
Which I
here.
think takes us to the answer to your question, is why did we come back with the idea of shrinking our purview? The subjectivity element of conduct is the challenge. And that's what Catherine is suggesting here, some process to get into the specifics so that all 5 members of council have the same understanding of what it looks like to be a council member at the get-go, and then hold yourselves accountable to that. We found that being objective about conduct wasn't necessarily easy. And as such, made the suggestion that you need to define that for yourselves.
So can I add on to that if I may? So I look at the agenda document, which is like all of city council agenda documents, in which you already articulate the mission and vision of the city. And then there's a set of values that are listed. We could go around this table and have however many of us there are, that many definitions of teamwork, dependability, respect. So what I think the current research suggests is that the governing body needs to be in agreement about what defines these values, because that's the behavior. The behavior drives the fruition, the implementation of the values. And we felt like it was not the role of the Board of Ethics to define for city council or the city in general necessarily what the behaviors looked like, but that was an opportunity for the board to govern, the council to self-govern in that respect. But we've started a list. Right?
Just one thing on this topic, so then, and I know Kim has more, I'm sure, but this, what you've outlined here is like the potential first go at like some guidance for us. Is this what you used when you got your research from other similar cities and towns in Colorado and beyond? This is what.
So it's cobbled together
Great.
from many different.
Thank you, and that.
So there are several more examples in
Can't-
here. many of which are quoted, you should see the example in this.
I can't
book.
thank you enough for like the work that you put into that for us,
Mhm.
because I think it's an invaluable start point as we get going with the new council, I think. So I just, side note, thank you.
You had other notes.
I also just, on this same topic, I also wanted to thank you for it. I am concerned about the level of prescription versus understanding, because, one of the first things we did as a council in the autumn was have a retreat a year and a half ago and really look at, how do we want to treat each other? But it was very general, somewhat as was provided here. And so my concern is, are you calling for more prescription? And in the sense then that my concern is if it's not prescribed, then, it's not in our agreement. How would you get around that balance between prescribing and adhering to that versus also having an agreed upon understanding of what we expect of one another?
I mean, I've got my thoughts on that are, first of all, to clarify, the Board of Ethics wasn't taking the position that we were going to prescribe for city council what that should be. That said, what we just talked about was that I do believe that city council should self-prescribe, if you will, what the conduct looks like. Where I think I'm going to read between the lines of your question, we're not talking about writing law. We're talking about a code by which there is mutually agreed upon acceptance that this will be the code of conduct for the particular body. It would be my expectation that any member of city council who's elected to council would by inference, if nothing else, if they're going to sit in a meeting, work through a list of what the agreements are, agree to what those are. One of the recommendations is that everyone sign an agreement, right? So you don't get to say, oh, I agree, and then change your mind. So there's a presumption of emotional intelligence with creating a body, creating its own code of conduct that presumes that all of the members who are part of the creation who do agree to it are actually agreeing to it. Now, it's a little bit of trust but verify. We're all going to agree to it, and we're going to sign an agreement that says we're all going to agree to it, so that when someone falls out of agreement, which is probably inevitable, that there's a means for the rest of the body to hold accountability.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Did anyone have any other comments on the question that Councillor Baxter raised?
Sorry, one more quick one on this topic. Have you ever seen, so we sign it and it's a document, but often what we're experiencing is things that have never come up before in this day and age are coming up. And so has anyone ever had like a living document where, let's say an issue is coming up and we're like, okay, as 4 members of council, this doesn't feel right. Can we add to this and then re-sign? Does that make sense? Just so, I don't know.
It's your document.
It's yours, right? Yeah.
But if we agree to that in the beginning, then it could potentially
Part of the
evolve.
agreement, right?
Yeah. We agree to continue to agree.
Yeah, maybe you try it for 2 or 3 months, learn from it, have some experiences and say, hey, it's almost like the process we're going through with the ordinance. This is ordinance revision number 2 or 3.
I think.
David, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to comment on Kim's initial question. And self-governance is messy. There's just no getting away from that. But I would suggest to you that whether you confront the individual or individuals that are causing problems directly, or whether you try to file a complaint with us and then get a ruling on it, you're gonna have repercussions either way, and they're not gonna be that dissimilar. So it's a messy process, but communication, I think, is what is really important. and not necessarily communication at a public meeting initially.
Well, isn't that the challenge, though?
It shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. I mean, if you've got a council member or members who are doing things that are perceived to be either against the interests of the city or making a council operation more difficult, the first step is to go talk to that person and say, here's my concern, here's the problem, here's the repercussions and results that I perceive from this situation. And I'd like to talk to you about it as to whether we can either curtail it or find another way to get where you want to go without causing this problem.
Sure, and I believe that some of that took place and has taken place under certain circumstances. And I also believe that the city manager has been a part of that process and having those kind of conversations. And I believe that the previous full-time city attorney also was part of those conversations. So it's not something that we haven't attempted or done in the past around situations. It's not new in that sense, but I agree with you that prescribing it, like here's a step-by-step process of how you handle this so that it's right there for us to say, okay, step number 1, here's what you do. Step number 2, here's what you do. Step number 3. I absolutely agree that that's a good way to do it.
And I think those steps are probably best devised by the council itself, as opposed to some outside agency saying, here's the list.
Yeah.
Because you guys live with it.
I do think that we probably need support from CML or someone such as that who gives, like, here are specific things that you put into it, because council has sat down with a team communication person and tried to create that kind of conversation, but it wasn't that specific about here's what you do. And if this happens, here's what you do, here, this happens. So I think that's a great recommendation.
Are we fairly covered this topic? This first question?
Do you want council feedback on what we think about that first
Yes.
question, or would you like it at the end?
No, I think that we can, I want to make certain we have our until 3:20 or 3:30 if we choose not to take a break. So I do want to make certain that we get to people's questions, but I also think this is an important conversation, and now may be the time for some feedback.
I think it is an important conversation. I also want to thank all of you for your efforts in taking the time to start a draft for us and for review this for us and come up with this suggestion. I recognize that it's been a difficult couple of years of work for all of you. And I also recognize that in any council and in any group of individuals such as that we are right now, that there's going to be a level of dysfunction that has to be addressed and worked through. My own take in listening to your recommendation is that I think it's a good one. I think it's a good one for us to take the time as a council to talk about what are our expectations of how we work together? What do we want those to look like? How do we want to interact? How do we want to address conflict? And have those discussions and have them right away when we start working as a team. And then also have avenues for if we think that it might not be happening the way that we had agreed to as a council team, what steps we take as a group. So I just want to thank you guys for your efforts and suggest that I'm in favor of moving in that direction.
Any other comments? Thank you. Thank you for that. And I know I see other notes, so I wanted, if anyone else has things to please jump in. I just want to make certain that we cover council questions.
Okay. I kind of wanted to talk about social media a little bit, because one of the things as a city councilor that is, it may not be written down, but communication with the residents is huge. And one of the things that people support you for or vote for you for is your opinion on situations and how you would vote and why. And so I absolutely agree that once a decision has been made, that you move forward with that, but you also have the right to your First Amendment rights to say, you know, this is what we're doing and this is why you're doing it. I may not agree with it, but this is what we're doing. You don't have to act like you agree with it. That's not required. And I think that by saying that counselors must stay away from discussions of items that will be or could be on a meeting agenda completely stifles our ability to converse with our constituents. I used to, before COVID, I had town meetings every single month. And that's one of the reasons why I sat down and talked with them was, here's an agenda item that's coming up. How do you feel about this? What do you want to see done? What is my job representing you? And I think that in this day and age of social media, one of the things that we do is we converse that way. Now, I don't do that very much. I do a newsletter, but it's not the same as this kind of a situation. But I think we need to be really, really careful about the freedom of speech and about working with our constituents.
There's an important distinction there, and I don't think it's drawn out in this, and it has to do whether you're acting in a legislative or a quasi judicial capacity. If it's a legislative issue, at least when I was here, it was always doors open for council to talk, and they should talk with their constituents to figure out what the sense and the temperature of the community is on the issue. But you get into a quasi judicial setting where you're going to actually render a judgment. And that's when you're prescribed from actually having conversations, because you're supposed to be making your decision based upon the record that's in front of you, not what you heard in a coffee shop 2 days ago.
Sure. No, you're talking about approving a development project or something. Absolutely. But that's not how this is phrased.
That's why I say it doesn't make that distinction, and it should.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's part of our point. Is that something that should be hashed out amongst the 5 council members before you even begin anything else? How are we gonna, what are our expectations for each other, and how we're going to represent ourselves, and how we're going to keep contact with our electorate, and how we're going to get the views of the and social media is.
Well, I brought it up because
in a lot of ways.
I'm really glad, David, that you clarified that, because I didn't want council or anyone else to think that you were recommending that there's absolutely no interaction with your constituents on social media. And this basically is kind of what that says. So, so I just wanted to make that clear and be a little bit more transparent about what you were actually recommending.
I think just in response to that, it's important that you understand we're submitting this as a template.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not a recommendation. It's a
I
recommendation.
understand, but these meetings and what people say in these meetings tends to be taken as a fact and the way it's going to be. And so if we don't at least say, hey, you know, I have a little bit of an issue with that, then the next thing you know, I get quoted in the paper saying, absolutely, you can't talk about anything that's on a meeting agenda.
Right.
Like, what? I didn't say that. So this is why, and it's not an attack on you guys or a criticism of what you're doing. It's just that we have to be, it's one of the problems of being a city councilor, is you have to be very, very.
It's not a criticism, it's a valid criticism. So let's just leave it at that.
I have
I-
a
oh, go
question
ahead, please,
on
go ahead,
social
no, go ahead.
medias, if you're gonna move
No,
on.
go ahead.
Okay. At the bottom, the last point, it says city council members may not use the city logo on their social media. Is there any other points like that that are like, that seems very like, you're not allowed to do that? Are city councilors allowed to like block people on their social media once they, like, there's certain, I feel like, laws and rules around social media and government.
So these references to the social media conduct actually came from a body of CML.
Okay.
So again, I think we would recommend that you guys refer to what those expert resources are available to you. And honestly, I don't know this, but does the city not have a social media policy with respect to
City councilors?
I can answer that.
staff? I mean, you know, this might be a Pandora's box that we've opened. I don't know.
I will say that when Counselor Baxter and I became counselors, and Melissa was also there, we were instructed that the city would not provide a space for us as an official, link or website, in part because of all the rules around it and the requirement to maintain all of that and response issues. And we were cautioned to be very careful with any social media presence that could be seen as being part of your council activities. I would like to say, though, on the same topic, I think the point you made at the beginning needs to be emphasized in my mind, which is once a decision is made, you speak as one voice, or once action is taken, you move on. And so I think that's a balance as well that needs to be brought up. It's great to have an opinion beforehand, but once council has moved on something, either providing direction or voted, then you speak as one voice. So I would want to see, I would recommend seeing some caveat to that point.
Well, and I would just point out that that's built into existing ordinance. That is one of the, and we could find it in the ordinance, but that is one of the expectations of city council members. So how that translates in social media then becomes the social media policy that the council would adopt.
Well, and from what I understand, my like personal Jessica page and then my Jessica Buell's Durango City Councilor page are different. They have different, so you're expected to behave differently on when you're representing the city versus. on
Yeah, and I think this
personal
goes to
page,
the point
I
that
believe.
David raised
Yeah.
about just being really clear about where you are representing yourself as an individual, where you are speaking in your capacity as a city councilor, and when you're speaking in your capacity as a city councilor, being clear about whether that is legislative or quasi judicial or opinion.
So I think
And-
when we're drafting this, we should like really dive into that component of it. Okay, sorry.
Just, we do have one for employees that's in our employee handbook, a social media policy. So if it's something that council would like to see, we could definitely share it for you.
I personally would miss seeing Barbara's travels on Facebook if you made her. And she's never uttered a word about politics.
Well, that's her personal one,
Yeah.
Right.
not her city
I don't know if
council
she-
one.
I didn't know she had another one, so.
I am happy to chat with anyone at any time and make appointments, but I don't use social media to advocate positions or anything to that regard. That's my choice. So, but yes, I'll continue to post photos of my deceased dog and travels.
So that is your choice. And the reason for including it here is that elected officials, there's an element of personal choice that you lose in the representation of city government. And so just defining what that is and the behavior around that.
I wanted to say, Lori, to your point, please forgive me.
No, that's okay. I just have one more comment.
You know,
Well,
you
for now.
talked about the ability to separate, but you really can't. I mean, I think the reality is you are a city councilor when you're in the grocery store, when you're at the gym, anywhere you are, at any meeting, at any case, you can't really remove your elected position from, and that's something you give up when you choose to serve in office. So I think that comment of, I'm not speaking as a city councilor, you are always, for the 4 years that you're in this office, there is some component to that. So I don't know how to quite get around your suggestion that you might be able to separate it, because I don't believe you can.
Well, to your point, Barbara, when the president walks in the room to talk to us about dog poop out on the sidewalk, he's still the president, so absolutely. But the president even has the right to his own personal opinion, as long as it's couched that way, as long as it's very, very clear. Because the last thing we want to do is stop anyone from having their First Amendment rights. They just need to be done appropriately. One other comment that I
And just
Yeah.
one thought there. So I served on the Office of Congressional Ethics Board for 12 years before I came here. The same dichotomy is there, and it goes to what you were asking a question about, for example. So the same individual is both the candidate and the congressperson, right? And during an election season, they have to perform both roles. But there is enough opportunity for specificity. For example, the Congress or the candidate can't use the official House seal on his website. The congressman can, and so they have two different websites, just like you've talked about having different Facebook pages. So there is a way to get to enough specificity sometimes to make those things more clear, so everybody does have that kind of understanding. And I'm just, I'm pointing out that it's typical of what you face when you're in these kinds of roles as an elected official.
I agree. So assuming that we're going to separate the code of conduct and the code of ethics, we're just making an exception right now for this conversation. Mediation comes up for me, because one of the challenges is, and using that in your process through the code of ethics, for example, one of the challenges is that did the person violate the code of ethics or not? And then the question is, how do you address that? If mediation is taking place in the middle there somewhere, you're putting a lot of pressure on the people that are mediating to agree to what a successful outcome is. We talked about this a little bit last time. What's a successful outcome? How do you define, do you define, the Board of Ethics defines what a successful outcome is for that mediation? Because you have the right to approve it or not, or accept it.
Yeah, so actually the language in the ordinance says if the mediation result sufficiently addresses the original complaint, the party filing the complaint will submit in writing a formal request to the Board of Ethics via the city clerk.
Absolutely. So it's up to the person filing the complaint to decide if mediation was a good outcome or not. What about the person who got accused? Where are their rights? I don't quite. So if it sufficiently addresses the issue, in whose eyes? And how do you determine if the issue is sufficiently addressed?
I think that actually that mediation applies mainly to code of conduct issues. And
It's in
that
there,
was
it's in
a-
the ethics.
I'm
Yeah, I'm
just saying maybe that's maybe needs to be clarified. Maybe it could be clarified, because I don't think it would come if you found somebody that this was in the code of ethics and they violated it. It shouldn't be a subject for mediation, I don't think. But on conduct, mediation should be helpful, I would think.
Right, and we're talking about having separated the two from
Right.
each other, because
So
I can
that
see,
could be clarified, and maybe it's not in the version we have put there, but I think
it would just be something to
it could be
consider.
worked out.
Yeah,
And further, I didn't finish the last
I'm sorry.
sentence. It then says the Board of Ethics may then dismiss the complaint.
Mhm.
Doesn't say anything about a finding. It just says dismiss.
And
So if
you
the
may-
person,
you
if the
may-
person brings the complaint and a mediation occurs and there's a finding reached through the mediation process, I shouldn't use the word finding, but a conclusion reached through the mediation process. That person that submitted the complaint can then request to withdraw it, and the board may accept that dismissal.
so, but then that gives the complainant the power over the outcome of the mediation, because if they aren't satisfied with it, they're not going to remove it.
Yeah, I understand your point.
Yeah, so that's a problem. Because then it becomes a mediation that has to be in favor of the complainant, essentially.
Would you, as a board, see that as an imbalance of power?
Well, no, I mean, if it's a dismissal, it's actually their point was not being accepted. They made a complaint and it's being dismissed.
No, before you ever get to the dismissal. So in there, it says that the complainant would apply for a dismissal of the complaint or whatever.
But it's assuming that the mediation was successful.
But what defines successful mediation? Is it the
Agreement between
complainant's
the
view
parties.
of the successful mediation or the respondent's view of a successful mediation? How do you define successful mediation?
Well, in its purest form, mediation requires the agreement of both the parties to define what the successful outcome will be. So it's not anybody external to the process defining that. It's not the complainant only or the respondent only. Mediation, the purpose is that the two parties involved will come to agreement on what will successfully resolve the
What if
issue.
they can't?
And you don't have a successful mediation.
So then if the case is based upon successful mediation, you're saying that whether or not they violated a code is based upon mediation, not whether or not they violated it. So I'm just saying it's a real gray area there, and you're giving the complainant the control. Why can't the complainant and the respondent file? Why can't the respondent file? I'm just bringing up some like really gray areas here that are kind of confusing.
I'm going to turn to Melissa and then I'm going to make a point if you don't read my mind and make it in advance.
Oh, you want to go first?
Go ahead. No.
Oh, you sure? Okay. I think Counselor Baxter brings up a very good point. It highlights the difficulty, I think, of code of conduct issues, the subjective nature of the code of conduct issues, and suggesting that they be handled in mediation. Well, there is a high probability at times that two counselors may or may not see eye to eye on an issue. And I think in that case, if that were to happen going forward, and if it was the case that this council was to decide, or future counselors were to decide that code of conduct be managed by the sitting council, then it would seem to me that an appropriate potential outcome, potentially maybe Counselor Baxter, help me work through this, in my mind would be that the body council as a body could then have a discussion publicly about this issue. And just as the Board of Ethics would have in the past, and talk about next steps and what that council thinks that next steps might be to productively move forward in the best way possible. Do you think that that would be okay? I mean, something of that nature? I mean, I see no other, there's going to be times when counselors don't see eye to eye and cannot come to a resolution, but there has to be a way to productively move forward. And so I'm trying to get there. And so that's what can then the council as a body have the authority to say, well, the majority of the council would like to take these steps to move forward. If it was in regards to, I don't know, not picking up the dog poop, like you're saying, Counselor Baxter, then they say that going forward, if it is there, it must be picked up. You know, I don't know, I'm just trying to be very black and white here, or very bland, but I'm trying to give us an avenue to proceed forth.
Why does not seeing eye to eye necessarily resolve into a conduct complaint or an ethics complaint?
Right, I don't know. Why has that happened?
Why would it?
Why?
Why has it?
Change our culture. It's like, because you don't agree on something, now you have, it has to be. a
Yeah,
conduct issue.
That's been the
And it's not
experience.
control, and it's not okay, and so how do we stop that? Just because I disagree with you doesn't mean you can't be friends.
Well,
So-
maybe
so
if the
may-
complaint was coming
Yeah.
to council, it wouldn't happen as often.
So
That's
may
a
I?
thought.
Okay.
May I suggest, because I want to make sure we move on, may I suggest that I believe Counselor Baxter raises a question in my mind as a potential imbalance of power. The way I interpret it right now, but I'm going to, you were kind of reading my mind, Melissa, is that there's it's proposed to be placed on a little more influence on the person making the claim. And I was going to suggest, one, that this is something this council needs to decide. You guys have given us your thoughts, but ultimately it will be a council discussion, this with future councils. And I think the idea of bringing it back and all of council saying, look, here's what we've tried, and this is what we see. Because one person could just say, no, I'm not going to say it's successful, and this is going to get dragged out for months. So I think what I was going to suggest is what you said, put it on council, have council come back and say, ultimately, we'll weigh this and decide if it's been addressed. And again, that assumes people are acting in good faith, seeking a mediation.
Right.
So does
So-
that sufficiently cover? Do you have your, did I miss it? Did you just turn on your?
No, but whenever the
Oh, okay.
questions were done, I'll make my comments.
Okay, because I just wanted to make certain that everyone's having a chance to
Just
speak.
comments to make.
Please.
But not on this topic. Whenever this is finished, I'll,
I'm not on this study session portion.
no, on this Board of Ethics and the Code of Conduct, Code of Ethics.
Go ahead.
Topic. But were you done with your questions or? was
The
there-
media, I think and you addressed a big portion of it, which is maybe that should be looked at again in the ethics part.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a study session, like you say,
Yeah.
it's not reaching decisions.
Nope. No.
So if you find a flaw there, you think needs to be fixed over or.
Well, maybe that's something
did
you
I-
guys just want to discuss. I don't know if it's a flaw or not, but you would have a better idea of that. But that was really, I think I'm finished with that part of the conversation. Councilor Bosnians.
Oh, wait, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Pat Hall raised her hand, please. I want to.
I just wanted to say with regard to mediation, I don't think, with my experience with an ethics commission of a different elected body, that most ethics complaints should be subject to mediation. There should be rulings on them. And I think it's just because that mediation was part of the code of conduct that we included that more generally than we probably should. I think it's going to be important to go through the code of conduct, not the code of conduct, the code of ethics, and see if there are situations or violations that we think should be subject to mediation as opposed to just a ruling that you violated or you didn't violate. With regard to mediation, it will be up to, my experience with mediation, as David's is, would be that both parties agreed that it was successful, not just one. And if it's successful, then you have a recommendation as to how it's going to be resolved in that mediation agreement that both people would sign. So I think that it needs a little more work, and that would be my suggestion that we do that.
So in my mind, I know Melissa, and I probably are thinking that like with the new council, we're gonna want a retreat that's gonna really outline like this code of conduct and like what steps. But your knowledge is so invaluable, like just sitting here talking about this, like I would love, I don't know if it's possible or what the rules are around it, but if someone or one of you with the books or would come and like mediate with us, not mediate us, but like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that for me, that would be invaluable. Like, I would love that. And like buy you wine or something.
Before we go on, I do want to ask, Pat, I want to clarify. If I heard correctly, do you see providing examples of when mediation in an ethics claim would be appropriate? Do you see that as the possible next steps of the work of the Board of Ethics?
I do,
All
but
right.
that's just me.
We're discussing it.
Does the board, other members of the board have a view of that? Because the specificity is appreciated. And I think that guideline could be helpful. I don't know what other council believes or the board. I raised that question.
You know, I will say that we've talked about this very issue that around just the experience that members of the Board of Ethics have had with other bodies, boards of ethics or commissions. Rarely is mediation an unnecessary process when it's strictly involving an alleged breach of ethics. When it's conduct, it's something completely different. And going back to months ago, we came to that study session with a recommendation to separate the two, because through the experience of this board, and both Pat and Catherine have been members of the Board of Ethics now for quite a long time, it creates a confusion and an inability for the Board of Ethics to make the best recommendation because they're conflated.
Yeah, my question was specific to ethics. If you saw it as part of a next step on your part to recognizing that they're rare, you either did or didn't. It's much more black and white in ethics, but any circumstances for which you could envision prescribing some kind of mediation. That was my question to Pat, and only on ethics.
No, I think, one thing we did discover is that we need more leeway than just saying we can either do this, this, or this. And we would read those 5 choices over and say, well, none of them really apply. And so mediation, there's no reason to write it out, I don't think. I mean, why would you? Because we don't know what those cases are, because ethics is not, it's not a law, ethics is an expectation of behavior that necessarily is not going to put you in jail, but it's going to, in our case, it's going, or in your case, in this, it's going to ruin your reputation with the electorate, because you need they need to feel like you're using their best interests in your decision-making process. So
Do you feel as though you, in your documents that you presented back to us and your recommendations, did you allow for that leeway without it also being just open, completely open-ended? Do you feel like you've adjusted some of your recommendations to give you more options?
well, for one thing, we suggested that the board vet its own members, which alleviates you from the problem of putting your friends on the board, which makes you, as Councilman Rule was saying, have some confidence in that we know what we're doing. And I think what we did add was take actions that the board thinks is appropriate. So, it's very hard to put those limits on things sometimes because life is complicated. And as our board member said, it's messy in governance.
I think a fix to the specific issue that Kim initially raised would be as simple as, in the language I read, it said the party filing the complaint, to switch it to the parties to the complaint.
Right.
And then you have both sides addresses, I think, the core of what you were concerned about.
Yeah, because I think we have to watch out for that innocent until proven guilty thing that kind of doesn't run through this. It's almost like you're guilty if you get it filed against you. So I think that's a great idea, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. And I saw, Pat, that you were going to say something else.
I just thought of two examples. If an ethics complaint is filed that a council member took a kickback on a contract and their vote was influenced, that would be an ethics violation that I would not think should go to mediation. On the other hand, if there's an ethics complaint on intimidation, sometimes there's a misunderstanding about an interaction. And that might be something, depending upon the facts, where we might say, why don't you try mediation so you can explain your positions with a neutral mediator about what happened and try to work through this.
Thank you. That's a very helpful example. And I'm sure folks will be, as we think about the new council coming forward, will appreciate having access to this media to listen to that in more detail or a second time. Any other thoughts before I know Councilor Bosman's has a few things he wants to ask. No apologies. Any other thoughts or items to be addressed? I'll make up some final statements at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, first I wanted to thank you all for what you do on the Board of Ethics. Probably not the easiest last couple of years. I also listened to the meeting you had last month. I think that was very beneficial to hear as a counselor, to see what your concerns are with the changes of the Code of Ethics and Code of Conduct and the background, why you made certain decisions. I think a lot of the changes that you recommended and have made are very beneficial. Streamlined definitions are better, some of the other aspects. I have a similar comment. I have a couple of small comments, but one of them is similar as Councillor Baxter mentioned, being that to me it is very important that any complaint that is filed, both conduct or code of ethics, that it is reviewed and screened by a completely independent and objective entity. So the example that the councillor, well, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't actually say that. So, yeah.
But I'm not going to say that. Do you said anything? So what I'm trying to lead to is that if there is a council and a councillor issue, it is often, it could be appear to be that the plaintiff, the defendant, the judge, and the executor are all the same body. And that's probably not the best. The same is if a community member files a complaint against an employee of the city. It may raise concerns if the city manager handles that complaint. So I think we need to, I would like to see that we assure that our community feels unthreatened to file a complaint and have the processes in place so to make sure it's transparent, fair, and objective. But a lot of the comments and the changes that are made I actually support, including the topics that were discussed. I have one very specific question that just when I read through the documents and even here you use the word initial screening, review, and initial review. What is the difference?
So the initial screening process is in section 6. That's the confidential period where additional information is gathered. It includes obviously the submission of the complaint and then response from. It's also an interesting spot where the existing ordinance allows for alternate process.
Yeah, and what is the screening and what is the review and the initial review? Because in the new ones, the new version, the draft version, I've seen the words initial review and review. So I was just,
That's the case. When you look at it, we were trying to include initial screening and initial screening are the same thing. Something like that, or that says.
but either way, screening is the same as initial screening is the same as review and it's the same as initial review. Is that correct?
So I think one of the distinctions is that the initial screening is actually prescribed in the ordinance, and it says exactly what the steps are for that. With the recommendation to separate the two, we wanted to build into it a process where there would be a review, but we're looking for different language other than initial screening, because initial screening is a very specific process laid out in the ordinance. And so I mean, we need to take a look at that, make sure that we didn't
We'll do a
mangle
word
the
search.
language, but the idea is that the Board of Ethics would still serve as the body to which all complaints would go for a review. So I'll just use that word in this context to determine whether it's should go to the city manager or back to city council or to the city attorney or sit with the Board of Ethics. So we were trying to, in language, make the distinction between the prescribed process of an initial screening versus an initial review of a complaint to see what the next steps would be. But maybe we need to
Yeah,
go
that
back.
makes
and look.
sense.
Thank you.
Initial screening is a word of art under that code.
Yeah, as soon as you use the word screening, then you have to define what is the screening. And
Yeah.
it seems that it's all pretty much the same. Once the initial screening is complete, that's the first step. And then the processing of the complaint.
Well, maybe we should just, I mean, it's a different function. What Lori is talking about is if we separate conduct out of the code of ethics and it's no longer within our jurisdiction, which we will not complain about overtly, then when a complaint comes in, we have to go through a review process to determine, is this a conduct issue or is it a ethics issue? And is it against a council member, against an employee, against an independent contractor, or against somebody else within the city? Because that changes where it goes.
And
I know you don't know that.
I know, but when I read it, I actually did, there is a gap in the duties or the responsibilities for the Board of Ethics in that specific, I'm gonna call it screening, to separate it, is it called code of ethics? If it goes to the code of conduct, that's part of the responsibility for the Board of Ethics is not listed, but it is listed as a task under the initial review by the Board of Ethics to see if it goes that way or that way.
Right.
But there was a lot of, and you mentioned several things during your meeting that are similar where the definition might not be completely
Yeah.
clear.
But thanks for bringing that up because we need to make that very clear.
Could I, oh, sorry, could I,
Sorry, go ahead. and
I was
your
going to make
comments.
a suggestion for next steps, but if you have more questions.
I just had one thing I wanted,
Please go ahead,
just one thing.
because I was going to make a suggestion to the board for follow-up.
There's a bunch of little details, like the fact that when is the meeting occurring at which you are discussing a complaint? I think the parties to that complaint should be informed of that meeting before it occurs. Documents being received, when documents have to be received, specific dates and times, those kind of things, because there's a lot of unknowing in the way the process works. And like, what does 5 days mean? Is it 5 days, is it from 10 o'clock, the receipt, to 10 o'clock, the next receipt? And when is this meeting occurring that this conversation is going to take place? I realize usually it goes into executive session. You don't necessarily get to hear that part of it, but I think the people involved in the complaint need to know, when is their case going to be discussed? And they need to be notified of that. So those were just a little like housekeeping details.
I think we did try to clean up the language around the definition of days,
I
but
think we did. I think that was part of the revisions where we're defining dates.
When you file something, you should get something back that says this person has
Oh,
the Fidelis time, and that
To
person
notify.
should also get a very specific notification.
It's not a
Yeah.
bad suggestion.
Yeah.
And I would, before I make a suggestion for next steps, I also would like to acknowledge, I particularly appreciate your changes to the form, recognizing the confidentiality of this and that the person filing the complaint signs their understanding of the importance of that. And I believe their efforts to keep that confidential. I think to your point, it's very important that we do have a process and that we try to maintain the confidentiality until it's at the appropriate point. And I think you need to define that when the information is made public. I'd like to suggest that, first of all, I'd like to, again, I think I'm speaking for all of council, thanking you for your work, not only on this, but this past 2 years. It's been a busy years. I remember, Catherine, when you used to say, let's get together quarterly and talk ethical issues. And you've been doing more than that this past couple of months. So thank you for that. I'd like to suggest that maybe we think, and I'm going to ask council for their direction to the board, is take some of these comments, fine tune some of them, change some of that language, maybe bring that back, and recognizing that this is a living document, to Councilor Buell's thought, that it may need a revision in 3 more months or 6 more months, but I'd like to not have the work that you've done just sit on a shelf right now. I'd like to find some way to incorporate that, realizing that it may not be perfect, but you have made significant recommendations to this process. So I'd like to get a sense from council of support for asking the Board of Ethics to continue, come back to us with this. This would ultimately, and I'm looking at this interim city attorney, would ultimately require a change in either a resolution or an ordinance, I would assume.
It would be an ordinance if you're going to change the code of conduct, the code of ethics, anything in there. And
Okay.
I'm kind of thinking, in my mind, they've done a lot of work on this. If we don't have a real red line version, probably a repeal and replace. A repeal and replace ordinance.
Okay.
Because they've made so many changes, some of which are housekeeping, some of which are definitional, some of which include how you count days, with
Structural
less than
and-
7 days. That it's easier to repeal the old one, or replace it with the new version.
And what might be a timeline for something like that for a council to see that?
Well, I think we're challenged here because we have a new city attorney coming on May 1st. And as you all know, the day after, I believe it was the day after our October meeting, our city attorney resigned. And so there's been this big gap, and we apologize for that because I don't believe that would happen if we'd had a standing city attorney. So I would suggest that the next council prioritize the ordinance with the new city attorney in whatever way you guys see fit. And then you, as the new city council, set up a time to have this code of conduct conversation. What does council do about it and all that? That would be my recommendation.
And that's what I was going to say. I was going to support what Barbara said and moving forward with the recommendations and kind of as we've kind of talked about here, but then also push for a date potentially in like May to sit down with the new council and like get this hammered out and all agreed upon. So we have just some firm steps going forward as to how we handle ourselves in a professional way.
So there would be that's really a 2-part request. One is to have the ordinance, either a repeal and replace, brought to us after the new city attorney has been on board. So that's one request. The second is also help at some kind of appropriate help at some kind of retreat to help begin to draft the agreed upon code of conduct for the next council. That would be two requests of this Board of Ethics. And I'll turn to the Mayor Pro Tem for thoughts.
I completely agree. I'm thinking marching orders. I'm taking notes and I really thank you all for everything.
I think the
Mayor,
city
Council,
manager-
if I can, and just even for the Board of Ethics, as we're talking about city employees, I do want to just make sure, I know that the councilors are aware that we're here, but also just a good time to refresh. That is one of the things that we did after the embezzlement is we do have a 24-hour hotline, ethics hotline for employees, as well as the public, and we probably could do a better way of filtering that out where people can call the number 24 hours a day. It goes to a third party that filters it out first. And if there's any concerns that come from that, it's routed. And if you recall that if it's on a city employee, it comes to myself. If it's on myself, it goes to the city attorney. If it's on the city attorney, it goes to myself, so that we always have a checks and balance that we went through. Because I know we had that discussion on that part. So when we look at that, and I don't know if that has a change in how you want to do work in regards to city employees, if that kind of in line with maybe it goes through the city manager's office. But either way, we have that hotline and be happy to have our employees talk to you a little bit about how that works so that maybe it filters in with your work as well. So just wanted to make sure that that was known still, that we do have that and it is operational.
Thank you for that. I appreciate having that actually having been put in place after the embezzlement case. I'm going to end by thanking you all for your work, but there's still much more to be done. We value your expertise and your experience that you bring to this. I appreciate it so very much. I'm going to call for a 5-minute break for one group to depart and just get ready for the next. So let's return at 3:35, please.
Thank you, everyone.
So. Want to take stabs to review a few of the suggestions which are
There's automobile ethics. There's. There you go.
Eyeball that as a secondary basis. I heard a little discussion about some additional provisions of the.
Barbara, over here. Did I miss it or did you forget to ask about interdivision?
Easy.
I forgot to do that. Let me do that. I'll bring that.
I couldn't remember. I'm like, maybe I totally spaced it.
Steve, I mean, I happen to know your schedule is such that in the next few weeks, the only time for your existing new workload is the 20th and the 21st. So we have it wasn't
Thank you. I'm going to bring us back together. And first of all, my apologies. I saw everyone there eager to come to the table, and I completely missed the new business section of the agenda. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to add that in because I know we have some people here that we need to address that. So I'm going to open it up for future new business. Does anyone have anything that they would like to bring up for a future meeting? Thank you.
Is this not the next study session on it?
It,
Because the printout.
here it is.
Right now, the next study session has us listed as doing, is going into the evaluations of our quarterly review of the city manager and the city attorney. I'll remind council that as agreed upon, this is a touching base. The appointees will provide their evaluation. We then give feedback, whether we agree, dissent with that. It is not the formal writing up of one evaluation, but it is that touching base with the two of our appointees. We would not be doing it with our third because Bill, if he were staying much longer, I think we would be doing that. Or we could choose to, if you so choose. But right now, our city attorney will start in May 1. Thank you. That's what's on the agenda for the 18th. Are there things that you would like to bring up for that agenda?
Yes.
And Mayor, just to clarify, the meeting on the 18th would be a special meeting because it has to be a special meeting in order to go into executive session.
Oh,
It's a special meeting instead of a study session.
thank you. And then also, I didn't want to limit it. You may have things you want to discuss in the future, not at the next meeting, but also down the road. So thank you for that clarification as well.
Mayor, can I go ahead with new business?
Please.
Okay. Eva, can you please join us? Is it okay for me, Jose, to have Eva join us at the table? I'd like to talk to council as the representative from CML on whether we would like to take a stance and provide a letter from city council on the Senate Bill 23-213 on the land use changes for affordable housing. And I want to get more details from Eva. She has a lot of history on this and she's been very involved. And so I'm just going to turn it to her.
Hi, I'm feeling a bit under weather.
So 1 minute, before you do start, Eva's here to answer questions as we think about whether or not we want to support
Correct.
the letter.
We're not having the issue right now.
Exactly.
I just wanted her to be up in case there were questions because she has details and she can maybe for the record provide a few more details about what we would be writing on.
So it would be, the point here would be, are there questions about what you've raised that you feel only Eva can answer?
I have some questions. So in regards to SB 23-213, we had talked about it at a previous study session where I brought it up under new business and we kind of talked about a support for a potential letter, but we didn't really have, the bill hadn't been introduced yet. So we kind of had no idea the direction we were going to go. So now it has, and council's gotten CAST and CML input from them. And so I guess, are we just, did you start writing a letter? Do you have a letter? Do we?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we did write a letter based upon Governor Polis's State of the State address, where he mentioned the More Housing Now thoughts, but nothing was specifically given on enough detail to really respond with something in support or in opposition to at that time. So the letter that we articulated and crafted was more in a tone of, we appreciate that you're engaged. Here's what we are doing locally in our jurisdiction. One of the other components of the letter that was not sent, but also it contained, was addressing the condominium construction defect law, because that's impacted over the last several years. We're not getting condominiums developed whatsoever across the entire state. And so that letter was on pause until now this has come forward. So we do have a draft letter that we've put together, but wanted to get some input from council if you'd like to do something like that. CML has also crafted an opposition letter template that I did share with council. There's also a resolution in opposition should council decide to move forward with some guidance on that as well. PAST has submitted their letter, which you do have a copy of. Some of it was in support, some of it was in opposition. CML is completely in opposition. They felt like there's too many flaws in the legislation at this time to even amend the bill as it stands. And so they're asking for opposition letters. And today I did just get another email. The Fire Marshals Association of Colorado has also written in opposition to the bill.
So Eva, first of all, I want to thank you for this. I do think it's important. We had discussed this before under a previous council, that when asking council to take a stand, that it really be important that we have access to both the for and the against arguments. So I think that's very important and appreciate making certain that that's provided.
Well, I think that, what is the specific request, Melissa?
The request is to see if council would like to take a stance. And if so, if there's council support to write a letter. I'll just throw out there that I guess I would lean towards taking a stance similar to what CML has supported, because that's what I've been involved in, which is maintaining local authority and local, keeping it, allowing local entities, local jurisdictions to make decisions for their community. And so I will start by throwing that out there and see if there's council support for that. And also, Eva, if you have any follow-up to that.
Council, your thoughts in support or of proceeding with a letter, or at least proceeding with a letter. It's not requiring you to sign, it's just having the information in front of you.
Yeah, I support proceeding with the letter. I lean a little bit more towards the CAST viewpoint, just because it is pretty specific to resort towns, but CML is they weren't quite direct opposition. They were they oppose or they support with a bunch of changes.
Okay.
But basically the changes were local, yeah, and they had a bunch. I just forwarded another email to a bunch of data that they put together. And so that's my opinion, but I don't know what staff feels or no.
Yeah, me neither.
Why are you
I was
looking?
gonna ask Eva if you've seen that.
Well, the CAS letter, I think, had the correct tone in that it's asking for a pause in the hearing to be scheduled so that municipalities can have an opportunity to digest the bill. It's detailed. I'm digesting it as well as many others. And so a lot of folks have not taken a stance quite yet, including, I think we've been monitoring the Colorado APA and other municipalities and what they're looking to do. And so the tone of the letter could certainly contain something like that as well, where we're asking for a pause for the hearing to be scheduled at the Senate floor and in order to articulate our stance.
I would
And Scott,
support
do you have
that.
any other?
Yeah, I like that tone also because I just think opposing it, there are so many things about it that I like, Housing Now, and helping communities to make that happen. And I think that that's part of the reasoning behind it. But I also recognize that there's a lot of things in there that really maybe were not as thought through as they could have been, or that we need more time to consider. So I would support the pausing and recommending more time to consider and digest and to look at impacts and actually unintended consequences, and then going forward from there.
Councillor Bosmans?
I'm open to look at that letter. I have to do a little bit more research, but thank you.
And I've read that letter, and I'm supportive of the letters actually, and I'm supportive of having it brought forward. Again, I would ask just for consistency, when we do see a letter, just a brief background on the pros and cons of it. That's, and not that I'm making work for you, it's been already developed, just so we have it documented that we're looking at pros and cons of anything we sign. City Manager.
Question. Is this going to be an agenda item? Is what I'm hearing that it is an agenda item, right?
Letters need to be an agenda item or can
No.
we just sign with information?
Well, the problem is, when
Signing
you
as a
look at
council.
that new resolution that y'all passed in May 18, 2021, it says if a letter is for support or opposition of legislation, staff will provide an opportunity for both sides of the issue to be presented. I don't know how to do that outside of a meeting. I mean, I guess if the definition is this kind of, I know Bill's not here, don't want to put him on the spot. If it's just that we will send you the pros and cons via email,
That was-
that's considered presented. I mean, I think that's fine. I just want to make sure that I'm working in line with the policy that was established. By the
So my thinking was that by presenting that in the package in its entirety, we would have then been presented with the pros and cons of the argument rather than a one-sided. I'll say I did not believe that we had to have a formal, review. We were given the information. The other question, though, is if council signs it as a council rather than individual counselors, that's a different kind of decision-making.
Well, so what we've done in the past is we've just allowed each counselor to sign or not to sign based upon their own support. There's been previous history of that. And then that way it's because it's not, if one counselor didn't agree with it and you sign it as the council, that's kind of weird too, because it doesn't reflect that. Yeah.
So is there support for having a letter drafted that presents the pros and cons, and counselors can then review it and sign on to it as they deem appropriate? And what would be the due date for that?
Bill muted. I didn't know if he had something. to
Oh,
add
I'm
with
sorry.
that.
Yeah, if council were to collectively say the city council of the city of Durango takes the following position on this legislation, then I think it's an agenda action item. I think to the extent that somebody is asked to prepare a document and you have a choice to do it or not, and perhaps only one of you will, and some might read into that and say, well, gosh, the only person who signed this was Counselor so-and-so. I'm kind of surprised that the mayor didn't sign and the rest of the city council. You see letters like that occasionally. Then that's not a formal action item. But if you take it as a body, I think you need to probably notice it up and put it on. And I realize that's very difficult to do in a legislative session in which things move fast and you only meet every 2 weeks.
Right, but if 3 or more signed, then does that require action?
I don't have a clear answer to that one. I just think that it's you.
Does it depend on how the letter is written?
I would not write the letter to say the city council hereby takes following position.
Right.
Okay,
So-
the undersigned hereby are
Support.
aware of the following legislation and encourage you to do the following.
Right. And that would leave us open to each one of us
And that
individually
leaves it
signing.
open to each one of you to make an individualized decision in your.
Maybe
capacity as
when Eva
individual
drafts the
legislators.
letter, she could make sure she gets that right language in there.
Sure.
Sure,
And we have precedent for that kind of letter before going out.
I wouldn't
I'll
be
get through.
surprised. I'm not aware of the 2021 resolution, so I'll look at that and I'll temper my opinion accordingly if it changes my mind.
We would appreciate.
Do we have other new business? Because we have an important topic, and I'm also going to recognize that I think the city manager was optimistic in his time allocation for proposed time allocation for this meeting. We typically go to 4:45. I'm going to ask council if there's support for going it certainly beyond the 4:15 that's proposed in here and going further, because it's an important discussion that will inform us later in the evening. So I'd like to continue beyond. Thank you. Do we have more support?
Yes.
I would like to end no later than 4:45. That's the usual time we try to stop by. Thank you. All right. Is there anything else on new business? Thank you, Eva, for being available. And again, my apologies for missing that on the schedule. All right. Next, we have the proposed restructuring in air. Who's leading on this? And you're going to give the intro as well? Perfect. Great. Take it away.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. and Mayor and Council, Erin Hyder, Assistant City Manager. And similar to previous discussions on this topic, as you know, this has been very much an interdepartmental team effort. And although Scott and I have the opportunity to present our work thus far on this topic, we're really speaking on behalf of the group. So we appreciate the continued interdepartmental effort on this project. Today, we're going to talk about enhanced community engagement strategy framework. As part of the most recent boards and commissions reorganization study session item, staff shared that as the project progressed, it became clear that it's also an opportunity to re-envision how the city organization facilitates public input, engages the community in decision-making, and ensures that participation is truly representative of the community. In that study session, staff previously shared some preliminary ideas around how public engagement can be revamped and expanded to accomplish these goals. Today's presentation is a continued discussion providing more details on the enhanced community engagement strategy and the beginning of the build out of the framework supporting that strategy. Although we've primarily been chatting around the community engagement strategy framework today, it's important to acknowledge that this project has spurred from the initial boards and commission reorganization project. And as we walk through this framework, we will also highlight how some of the potential changes related to the boards and commission reorganization intersect and fit into the framework. So like I said, acknowledging that this project spurred from the boards and commission reorganization, we want to provide a quick recap of that initial request and how the project initially started, along with the clear goals that staff had to consider. So number one, as a recap, this project started when council asked if staff was going to reimagine boards and commissions from scratch, what would that look like? Council asked staff to be bold and visionary in this consideration. And as we move towards performance excellence with a focus on continuous improvement, review and evaluation and reevaluation of what we currently do and assess it as how it would best and continue to serve the community moving forward. Some of the considerations that we focused on were how do we ensure that we increase and diversify the feedback council receives to represent the entire community? How do we reduce the administrative steps into the decision-making process and establish more clarity for the public related to the sequence of events? And how do we address redundancies within the boards and commission, ensure that boards and commissions aren't competing against each other, but instead have a unified and holistic citywide approach? What we found in this initial, these things that we wanted to consider from a public engagement perspective included a variety of things. Number one, currently advisory boards are often used in lieu of a more robust public engagement process on projects. The average tenure of boards and commission members is approximately 6 years. So this is great, particularly from a community contribution, from a knowledge and historical perspective. But if council is looking for regular, refresh, representative, and new perspectives, that length of tenure doesn't always yield that perspective turnover. The average public comment provided through boards and commissions, as we mentioned, advisory boards have been often used in lieu of public engagement. So that public comment provided through boards and commissions overall and across all boards generally is less than the average public comment received at a regular council meeting. And with this, we also see a need to create metrics to measure the variety of public engagement opportunities and how we're inviting and getting a response from the public around that public engagement. And current public engagement facilitation is really only reaching a very narrow segment of the community and thus does not reflect the entire community or always incorporate diverse perspectives. So although we do many things across the organization right now to capture feedback, we believe the organization can benefit from an identified framework that outlines and creates a consistent approach.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. So based on that direction that staff got from council, the cross-functional team has been meeting regularly and for long stretches of time to work through how do we respond both in a recommendation about a board and commission reconfiguration, and also to give you assurance that that will not undercut our broader outreach and engagement. And this is something that communities talk about a lot and has a lot of thoughts been put into it. And so we found some really good resources, and this one in particular really served as a foundation for what we're presenting today and what will continue to take shape as our community engagement strategy. This talks about the spectrum of public participation and how there are different types of outreach and types of feedback that communities get. This is from the International Association for Public Participation, IAP2 is their acronym. And you can see it starts sort of at just a basic informational campaign or outreach. You can think of that as like a press release or a social media post or something. We're going to share information with the community. We do that a lot. Tom Sluice and his office have really helped us to organize that and be really consistent in our messaging. And then as you move along that spectrum, you get into consult, and that starts to be a little bit more two-way. You're asking for input, feedback on alternatives, feedback on decisions. That an example of that would be like a survey, an opportunity for a survey. We're asking questions of the community. They're providing us feedback. Involvement, working directly with the public throughout the process, and consistently communicating the intentions. Think about that as a project open house. So that's very project specific. And then ongoing project communication about how will we ensure that people who came to the open house, we get their emails, and then we're sharing back out results. Collaboration, that's more targeted stakeholder outreach or working groups, something we use quite a bit. I think Councilor Baxter with Planning Commission and the comprehensive plan update, we would have a working group specific to that project. That's more of that collaborative. It's a longer period of time. It's more complex questions and dialogues than just a survey. And then lastly, ending up with really empowerment. And that you can see the summary of that is we will implement what you decide. So we're saying that to the community or to the group. So that's really a vote on any issue, a ballot measure. That's also our quasi judicial review process. So in community development, planning commission, historic preservation board, you've really set up a structure. The city has a structure to empower those boards to make the ultimate decision on those items. So really what this helped us show, and what we hope it shows you, is that community engagement is bigger than just administering some advisory boards. The advisory boards are a component of community engagement, but as you can see on this spectrum, there's so much more that we're currently doing, and we see opportunities to really create more of a cohesive package of engagement beyond advisory boards or just boards and commissions. It's much, much bigger, more robust than that. This spectrum then informed our team's overall goal in developing and updating our approach to community engagement. So you can see that goal here. Back to that idea that really the organization as a whole is grabbing hold of continuous improvement and performance excellence. We know we have those processes, we have communications. How do we really dial that in and make sure they're consistent and make sure they're tailored to what each project needs in order to facilitate meaningful and truly representative engagement? And I think that's what we really came to as a current shortfall, and defaulting to a collection of citizens who have a real specific interest in a certain topic that isn't always representative of the broader community's ideas or desires. And so how can we do this? And you can see listed the 5 key components to support this goal in achieving the strategic plan through community engagement. First and foremost, keeping the community informed, timely information, again, that's more of that one way, making sure we're being transparent, we're getting things out there, gathering input and tracking that, where that's coming from and how to respond to that. We want to capture a wide variety of voices, as I said, that are representative. We want to optimize the quality of feedback and make sure that that is truly going and having an impact. And it's not just sort of a discussion at a meeting for the sake of having a meeting, but we're asking targeted questions with intended outcomes that we want input on, not just vague or general outlets for feedback. And then continuing transparency on how that feedback that we receive influences decisions that are made. So this enhanced vision and working framework that we're presenting is intended to help us achieve more consistency in guiding staff's work across departments, from community development, parks and rec, public works, city manager's office, all of those looking for consistent guidance in how we deploy outreach based on a project, a program, or what we're looking for. And also to the public to clarify the city's intentions and what the systems are that are in place for how the community members can participate. We really want this to be integrated into all we do. It's not, oh, here's something that somebody does to engage the community. It's really built into every process and program that we have, those opportunities for dialogue with the community and for community members to give feedback. So we took that overall kind of spectrum from IAP2 and we kind of simplified it a little bit into these 3 points. And this is, I'm going to kick this off and then Aaron's going to talk a lot more specifically about the various avenues in each of these 3 areas for feedback. The 3 key elements, as I said, start with inform, more of one way, getting information out. How do we provide that timely, consistent information? And we see an opportunity to leverage more enhanced technological tools to make that more convenient. That's already happening with the various social media outlets, allowing people to access information in a variety of ways instead of, posting it in City Hall lobby or things like that. We're really diversifying those outlets on how we inform the community, both on what topics are currently the hot topics or current projects, but also informing them on how they can provide input. And then circling around to engage, that is more of that dialogue. It becomes two-way. How are we seeking input? And again, making it equitable and convenient. And that moves into participation where people are, after having that dialogue, they get information, they're asking clarifying questions, and how do they really participate actively in a way that gets to a decision that reflects the community's desire. So we felt like those 3 areas help to capture the different ways that we want to reach out to the community. And what we want to highlight now is how this recommended approach takes a much more holistic view of engagement and will ensure that engagement is appropriately scaled, consistent, reliable, and inclusive of all participants.
Okay, so before we launch into the 3 elements that Scott highlighted there in more detail, we do want to highlight the significance of having a centralized, reliable hub, which highlights our engagement opportunities. Now, the theme of our conversation today is how are we going to enhance the things we're already doing? We're doing a lot of these things already, but so this is the approach of how do we enhance this? We already have an engaged Durango, way to communicate through our website. But what the media team has been working on is, like I said, an enhanced and consolidated engagement site. And we're calling this our Engaged Durango portal, which really will become a central hub of all public engagement opportunities. So this here is a screenshot of the draft in which the team has been building in the background. And there's a couple items on here that we'd like to highlight to really show how we envision this becoming more of a true hub. So you'll see there in the center, there's 4 tiles right now. We see that we'll have tiles, and these are what they would be right now, but the tiles feature current projects with links to more detail and easy access to share direct input right on that project. So an example here would be the City Civic Center, the current project where we're exploring that opportunity. When you click on that tile, it takes you to the fully built out page of what's going on in more detail related to that project. And then you can see anyone can provide their direct input on thoughts, comments, suggestions that they might have regarding that specific project. Yeah, so we're gonna have a collective portal, which then will be either a consolidated report out, and we're gonna talk about it a little bit more and how we'll incorporate it in public opportunities, but if it's a specific comment or question, it would go directly to that departmental leader to address and incorporate, or to council. We'll have other tiles on here that feature departments that have a list of current departmental projects. So with a link, very similar, a link to a page that has their list of current projects that they're working on. An example you can see up there is the Parks and Recreation tab, or the tile. It's very similar. Someone could go on, take a look at all the projects and share their input. Hey, what about this? I have an idea about this. Here's a comment or concern I have about the project that's going on there. On the left, you'll see that right now, the team is listing all the different ways that folks can provide or we can seek input and learn what's going on, along with the consolidated public engagement meeting calendar that's on there. The top right is the way that we can, publish and seek public participation when we have open seats on boards and commissions, or we have a new working group we're ready to push out, and we're ready to solicit interest related to that working group. So that would be what's it here on this homepage too. And then the bottom, which you can't see behind the transcription there, is a general option to provide, hey, I have a comment, suggestion, feedback, very similar to what we have on there today, how we've rephrased and reframed the requests for input, so we can capture that. So we wanted to highlight this page before we got too much more, because it really becomes the centralized tool around the capturing, the consolidating, the summarizing the feedback that we can capture from the community. So the first element that Scott talked about was inform. So once again, how do we provide timely, consistent information and provide opportunities for the community to learn, leveraging enhanced technological tools, similar to what we talked about with Engage Durango, as a starting point for engagement. So once again, it's a critical piece of pushing the information out and making sure that's available to as many people in a variety of different ways. So you can see here we highlighted a couple different examples. So obviously focus on sharing the information out, leveraging Engage Durango, attending and watching council meetings. There's lots of information that is shared through those. Similar with join boards and commission meetings, very similar, participate, listen, attend, and you can also provide comment there. And then continuing to use community notices when we need to get information out regarding like maybe smaller projects or a smaller group of individuals that we need to contact. Lots of different ways there on how we support the inform element. So engage. So how do we create avenues for dialogue and opportunities to provide input based on the levels of engagement that we discussed earlier that Scott highlighted in the grid through a variety of modalities? So in person, through designated groups like a boards of commission, online, via email, handwritten letters, any of the above. Expanding the number of ways folks can provide meaningful impact and expands the groups in which we reach was a focus here. So right now our engagement is heavily leveraged on in-person meeting attendance, which makes it really hard for a large number of groups within our community to engage with us. How do we make it easier for someone with multiple jobs, or maybe they have family responsibilities at home, or they have some other obstacle that limits their ability to participate and at, in-person meetings that happen on a day when maybe they're also doing something else. And so we are really conscious of that when we were really sketching out the framework around different opportunities that support ways that we engage with folks. So you can see that we've categorized these by the varying levels of two-way engagement with different levels of influence that Scott discussed earlier. So if we start at the top there, consult, if we go back to that grid, that was right after inform. That's really how to obtaining feedback. So how do we keep you informed, listen to, and acknowledge your feedback? So some opportunities here are, of course, through public comment, potential council office hours that we could have potentially, if council's interested, a rotating schedule where a counselor is available to meet with folks. That's pre-scheduled registration kind of opportunity that would be available there. The input via the Engaged Durango portal, you can see that we've created not only just open-ended ways to provide feedback, but also, hey, we have this specific project, and we can gather input related to that specific project through the portal there. And of course, contacting council directly, and even staff, as that happens already. Involve means to work with. So how and what does that look like is how do we reflect the community feedback in the alternatives that are discussed and communicate how they influence the decision. Some examples here are the Engaged Durango bi-monthly forum, and we're going to talk about this one in a little bit more detail. In project-specific outreach. So this is going to be, once again, smaller scale, more informal meetings, surveys, stakeholder interviews, neighborhood meetings, opportunities like that. And collaborate is to partner with. So we look to incorporate your advice and recommendations into the decision to the maximum extent possible. So hidden behind the transcription there is these are opportunities like boards and commissions, working groups, and project-specific engagement.
I think just one thing to point out, I was going to say it later, but here might be helpful, even with the proposed reconfiguration of boards and commissions, we're still going to have, I think it's 15 boards and commissions opportunities. So the narrative has kind of gotten to this point of, oh, you're slashing all boards and commissions and there's not going to be opportunities to participate that way. And that, I just want to clarify that that's not the case at all. There's still, we will still, based on our research of other peer communities, we will still have a higher number of boards and commissions than many other communities. So I just think that's important for the record, that there's still those very collaborative and long-term sort of ways to participate.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, so there was a couple items, as we mentioned before, that we want to kind of pull out as they're related to the board organization, the changes, potential changes to that, and how do they nest in or intersect in with our framework that we're starting to work through from the community engagement perspective. One of the ones that we'd like to highlight is to talk a little bit more in detail around the working groups and provide an example. So the working groups highlight how we intend to incorporate folks with either expertise, perspective, or experience based on the project to focus on collaborating. So this falls into the collaborate category, to collaborate with staff, applicable consultants, and even elected officials, depending on the project. And so when would working groups be used? So, or a little bit more about detail of working groups would be, we'd use them for high level project planning, fee-based projects or consideration, service expansion, enhancement projects, and potentially in cross-departmentally focused projects or policies. When we're seeking specific expertise or to seek diversity of experience, perspective, knowledge of a topic, once again, to collaborate with staff and the experts there. And then I think it's important to recognize that we envision creating a very simple or basic matrix to determine when a working group is needed. Right, so if we go back to the grid of the levels of engagement, not all projects require all levels of engagement, but some projects require several levels of engagement. So creating, you know, a way to evaluate the need for a working group. And some of the ideas that we're thinking about right now, our initial factors include, you know, meeting strategic plan goals, staff's assessment of the project or the policy that's being elevated, the quantity of the feedback, or even the potential feasibility of the project in the first place. So those would be some initial factors. On the right-hand side there, we have really an example of how we envision promoting and inviting interest and even indicating, hey, we're going to launch a working group. The media team once again drafted kind of the beginning of some examples so we could envision what this might look like. So over on the right, you can see this would be for a natural lands inventory assessment working group. And once again, I want to say this is an example. This is not like launching. So I don't want to be confusing there. You know, here we indicate, I would give a brief focus of, you know, the opportunity is to participate with Parks and Rec staff to complete a natural lands assessment, provide recommendations looking forward. The group is looking for 2 to 4 community members to participate, and the time frame of the working group that it would operate is from June to December of 2023. Now, when a person who's interested clicks on it, there'd be more detail around really the project, the detail of the project, the qualifications that we're seeking that support the working group members.
Could you also envision a recruiting process where you as staff actually go out and rather than waiting for interest to come in, you might say, we really want someone with lived disability experience or something like that to help us think through this, or we want someone with this. So it's one thing to take who comes in and it's another thing to recruit.
Yeah, absolutely. So how we envision this working is as a working group is identified, we would then push it out as exactly as you mentioned. It would not be a standing, if you're ever interested in joining a group, here, sign up here. This would be very targeted. It would be timely. And I mean, there would be more than likely in a lot of projects, a beginning and an end date. You know, this example is an example of a technical working group that would provide for specific expert input while helping not only in the project, but would also help steer the larger community engagement specific for this project. So, you know, for this, back to the qualifications of what we're looking for, if we tie it to this example, you know, in the detail and in the promotion, we might suggest that, hey, we're seeking community members that have experience specific of something like CPW, hiking groups, Durango trails, like the weed mitigation groups. Like we could be that specific in our recruitment. And that's kind of gives more detail to this example. All right, so the Engage Durango bi-monthly forum. So this, we talked about this earlier. We've continued to refine this description and our thoughts around it. I think initially this was called like a director's forum. But if we continue to expand and really leveraging the feedback that we're getting around Engaging Durango, and that is our portal for soliciting feedback. You know, the forum itself would have a format, it would bi-monthly, that at the beginning of each, how we envision the format of the meeting is there would be a summary of feedback gathered through Engage Durango, along with and provided that to participants, along with the related actions and responses. So I think it's important to say we get a lot of feedback already, but then the teams can already provide any kind of actions or responses that have taken place. And then it would follow, you know, some type of departmental presentation on current projects or policy discussions, followed with either an open house discussion or like a Q&A session direct for the folks attending. The bi-monthly forum would produce a summarized report of feedback that would then be presented for council, and we anticipate this could be launched in June of 2023.
So then that last leg of the stool, inform, engage, and participate. These are more of the, ongoing opportunities to directly influence decisions that are being made. So some of these were touched on already. We're still going to have a number of board and commission operating and that we'll need members for, and that people will be able to participate in. There's always volunteer opportunities with Parks and Rec and other departments to get involved that way. Aaron shared about working groups and how community members who are interested or experienced in specific fields can still contribute that expertise. And I think we've heard that a lot about the advisory boards in those groups. How do we as community members share that passion that we have and that experience? And there will still be avenues for that. And then ongoing invitations for feedback, surveys, open houses, those typical things that we do. And I think just pausing and highlighting again how we're summarizing that some projects will just need one of these tools maybe, but many of them will require multiple tools. So back to like an update of the comprehensive plan. We have in the past, we've had a working group and we've gone out and we said, oh, we want an architect on that. We want a transportation expert. We want a utilities expert. And we have a working group. So we're going to meet once a month for the next 6 or 8 months. But we also had community meetings. We also had surveys. We also had mapping, and we'd go to the farmer's market and we'd get input that way. So a project of that scale is going to hit a variety of these tools and need to utilize a variety of these tools. And what has been really helpful about this process is just identifying all of those ways that we engage with the community. And I think responding back to that fear that we've heard of, you're taking away our opportunities to participate and have engaged governance and democratic processes. That's obviously far from the case. And we just wanted to give you the confidence that that's not the intent, that's not the outcome of this relatively simple or straightforward reconfiguration of a few advisory boards into a more cohesive and sort of focused role. We still have all these tools at our disposal and we'll be doing, it's something that, is an interest and a concern for a lot of staff about how do we make sure we're integrating the community's voice into the decisions and the programs that we're just designing. So we wanted to take some time to just kind of walk through a series of steps on, okay, if someone has a topic or a proposal or something that they want to bring forward, how would they go about that? I think you have a sense already of all the ways that they could do that, but it would very much depend on what is that proposal, what is that idea that's being brought forward. Is it just a one-off thing that staff takes and evaluates and takes action on? Those happen every day. And if Jim says, oh, I think you should put a sidewalk in front of my house, we can take that. We don't need to set up a working group. We don't need to have a survey. We don't need, that's the simplest. We as staff work with a citizen to get to an answer on their proposal. That happens all the time, every day. But then something more complex, pickleball advocates come out and say, this is what we need. We have these forums, we have these online comment forums. Turi has emails that he gets. It starts to build into sort of a critical mass. And we say, okay, there's this pattern here. We need to then look at this. How does this relate to the strategic plan and align with the goals that have been identified? How do we take this? Is this a capital improvement project that the proposed financial advisory board would review as part of their annual process that you'll hear about later tonight? Or is this something that we need a working group on? And we need to pull in people from the pickleball community, from neighborhoods, from natural lands to assess opportunities and move forward. So there's not a simple formula. There's still going to be staff discretion and professional sort of discernment about how complex, how weighty is this topic, and what is the right avenue to see that through. But again, that's something that is happening all the time, and we have a lot of experience in. And when do we elevate it to council? When do we take it to maybe planning commission as an informational item? And those types of things. So you can see that flow of public input, analysis first and foremost, with the strategic plan alignment, and then a decision on what is the right tool to use. And then, as we do with every final decision relating to policy or budget implications, it comes before council. There's a presentation, we give the history of this is what we heard from the community. This is how we got that feedback, and here's the recommendation before you. And much public comment on that, even at that final decision stage, and then council makes a decision on that. So that's just an example or an overview of that process and how that would work through those different series of steps. One more slide, and then we'll have some time for conversation and questions. You can see the next steps here. I won't go over all those, but we do want to, and we've started to research ways to measure this to make sure that we're getting the diversity of input that we want, that we're getting the overall volume of participation, making sure that that feedback is leading through to changes. And then we would like this to become a packaged, adopted community engagement strategy. This is the framework now and the elements. We think we can do a little bit more refinement, take your input on this, and really come with a robust strategy that staff across the organization can use, some decision trees to say, okay, here's the question I have. Do I do a survey? Do I set up a working group? How do I work through implementing these different tools? So that's what we're envisioning as next steps. And just to close, I think what we hope this provides you, council, and the broader community is the confidence and the understanding that with regard to the action that's being proposed this evening, consolidating a few advisory boards into a more cohesive and coordinated board with clearer direction on what their role is will actually enhance our effectiveness of engagement and does not undercut the systems that are already in place and that we want to enhance to ensure governance of our community remains collaborative with our citizens, and that there are ample opportunities to engage and participate in governance. So hope that helps you as you anticipate deliberating and deciding on that, and then also just giving you confidence that there's a team that really is passionate about this and wants to make sure it's done well and in an inclusive manner.
Thank you, Aaron and Scott. I appreciate this presentation and the work leading up to it. I'm going to open it up for questions or comments from council.
I can start real quick. Thank you for all the work that we've put into this. I think that especially a lot of the community has heard about this in the last month, right? And when boards and commissions were notified, and unfortunately, some of the boards and commissions weren't notified back in February when we were starting, a year ago, when we were starting to discuss this and really reach out and to you guys for a better way. And so I think it probably came across as you're doing this too fast, and that's not the case at all. And so that presentation was amazing. Your goal of expanding and enhancing community engagement is everything that I think that I wanted when we were doing this. Back when we redid the strategic plan, when we came on board in October, that was that part of it. And then our outreach to the community about what we do and more, communication was one of my big pushes to get on the strategic plan because it wasn't originally on it. And so I think that this is I love our boards and commissions, and we have whether it's 5 or 7 or 9 that sit on each of these boards and commissions that are kind of melding together. There is a great amount of history and knowledge, and I don't want to miss that. But as long as I'm hoping that these community members and our volunteers on our boards and commissions know about this plan, and that there's still so many avenues to participate and serve on current 15 boards and commissions. That was like one of the big things in a lot of emails we're getting, you're getting rid of boards and commissions. And it's like, oh, no, we still have a lot. And so I think that that is great. I have a couple questions. Do we have like a plan for like how we're gonna, this is a big job. Like that's a lot of between Engage Durango, between the bi-monthly meetings, between facilitating how all this input goes out to staff. Like, do we have an idea for staffing? Is it going to be more staffing? I just get nervous when it's like, everyone's going to help, that like something will get dropped.
Very good question. As we look at these things, I think that there probably might be a necessity for a coordinator type as we go through on this. But I would also say that a lot of these things that are going through are things that staff does. We just haven't formalized them. We've had several open houses that we conduct that we haven't really formalized into that part. Some working groups that we've created that we haven't really formalized in this portion of it. So I would say that, as we continue to go through these and like any process, and when it changes, we analyze, we take a look at where are we, what are we missing, what are we needing? Nothing ever comes out of the box perfect. Times it takes adjustments and moving through. So that's something we are looking at, but we'll continue to kind of digest this as we go through, see how it works through, and then just see where some of the gaps are that we may need to address if there is a gap for staffing.
Sorry, I was looking at my notes that I can't even read that I write. Current board members, will there be like a list of like current board members that you can specifically, like, will you have an email list? I know you said that people can go on and like apply for specific things when they come out, but if you're going to like reach out, like e-bikes, like I would think there's a few people on the Parks and Rec board that would, or the Natural Lands board that would be really beneficial to have on, and so will there be a database like by category or specialty or knowledge, or I don't know. What are you envisioning?
Well, several of those items. So I think to answer your first question, we do have a database of all of our boards and commission members, both current and previous. And so whenever we're going to push out a new opportunity, we would absolutely be able to, target that group to solicit their interest as it might relate to their expertise, their experience, their knowledge. I think the other piece of it too is part of, like working with Turi on the Natural Lands Working Group and talking about like what the input would best benefit that group is brainstorming. Okay, it would be great to get folks that, work or serve or have experience in these very specific areas. And so we kind of, in specific instances, we can create organic lists to then target and push out and to share beyond the general distribution or announcement of the opportunity. That's part of what I think makes the working groups, back to Councilor Noseworthy's, hey, we want to make sure we target specific groups for the specific needs or the perspective we're seeking. And so we're able to do that.
May I follow up on that? I think that's important. I give an example. You use e-bikes. It would be interesting to hear from like the senior outdoors, the hiking community that may have a different view of e-bikes and their merit. And it may be important to hear from, the differently abled community. So I can see the value of putting thought into that so that it's an inclusive, not just an advocacy working group. I think that's important. And that's a very different perspective to say, let's hear from all of the community on this topic. I mean, that's what you could achieve through carefully designed recruitment, or at least qualifications that you're seeking.
I think that's also when we speak back to the enhancement of, because we do some of these things, the enhancement is moving from a blanket approach to recruitment or indicate sending, hey, we have this new opportunity. We just send it out to everybody, or we don't send it out to everybody, but we post it, right? The enhancement is moving towards that targeted approach of the groups and the perspectives that we're seeking.
And then I have one other comment, and I think I'm done for right now. Why some of the comments I've gotten from boards and commissions that I sit on is that access to like council thought, like in regards to like what they're talking about and like direct, not giving them direction, but just kind of helping them with, maybe like how we would potentially like think about something. And so I think that the council office hours, I think would be great for our community, especially if it's a sign up. So that way, if no one signed up, you don't have to like show up. And then also a potential, I don't know how it would fit, but a council member at the bi-monthly meetings could potentially be like a good add, just so there's, and then that way, if something gets brought up that seems super important, one of us can bring it up at, new business. So I think that might be a good, since we'll be on maybe less boards and commissions, maybe one of us can alternate and fill in there too. Just an idea. I don't know. Okay.
I have a question for you, and your thought on that. Would the counselor be there mostly to listen rather than to participate?
Just like now on boards and commissions, how we're supposed to be there just to listen, but if something comes up that you see like, okay, like this is a big topic and clearly we have the ability to bring it up under new business and then also report back under reports and actions after that meeting takes place. I just feel like it's a good access point to us. And then I feel like a lot of the people coming potentially could be people that currently serve on boards and commissions, and then others, which is great that we're hopefully reaching other people. And that, I don't know, it's just another way for us to have access to our community. So yeah, there you go.
Other questions or thoughts?
I'd like to say something because I'm also aware of time. I'm really taken by the ability to be more inclusive and to get more diverse thinking in a very targeted manner. And I actually think this, while it wasn't necessarily your design to incorporate this into your DEI work, you've done that. And I actually believe you have the capacity to be a leader in municipalities of taking something that has served us well, rethinking it to be more inclusive and to get more diverse. And I use the example of the single parent who can't commit to one day a month for the next 3 years, but wants to be involved. And I see through this working group, the potential for so many more people to give us their thinking, their feedback, for us to hear from them in meaningful ways. So I'm intrigued by what you've put forward. And I was particularly interested that it's not just to apply and who comes, but that you're targeted. So thank you.
Do you have something to add?
Yeah, go ahead. I really want to thank you for your time and effort in helping us re-envision this entire process, which we instructed you to do a while ago. And I recognize, as Councillor Buell said, that this has been an ongoing process really that started with a working group from Councillor Baxter and Councillor Buell when you first,
2019.
It was
and
a
then-
noteworthy-
Other
okay.
firms did not. Yeah.
We did it
2019.
too.
Yeah.
So a very long time in the coming. That's why I definitely also would like to hear from Councillor Baxter, because you guys have spent a lot of time working on this and thinking about this. It was really interesting, your presentation, to listen to it carefully and to kind of come to some of the conclusions that you came to talking about. And it really seems like almost with our 23 boards and commissions currently in this current structure that we've almost gotten to structure, that we've almost kind of limited in some ways the avenues for public participation to provide input because of that structure of just go to the board, go to this various boards. And, I do have a couple questions, but a couple thoughts too. I was wondering if we were to engage Durango gathering input through, if maybe that could be a regular presentation to council in a public setting where you're in the agenda doc, you're providing that documentation that you're getting from the community, that input that you're getting from the community, and then you're summarizing it and providing that to council like on a monthly basis, perhaps. Because one of my questions that I had was, I'm a little bit concerned that bi-monthly engagement meetings might be too few. I don't know, and I want to make sure that we're open to, if we want to do this monthly, that perhaps we do this monthly. And do we want to have, I think just Councillor Buell may have brought this up, do we want to have a counselor present at some of these? I don't know.
Well, maybe if participation is crazy, we can increase it to once a month, right?
Maybe, or something like that, but I want to be fluid with that perhaps as we go. And also, I agree about, the council, I like the idea of rotating council office hours. It's intimidating for one counselor sometimes to start and take on the task of monthly office hours. Whereas if we could rotate it and possibly do different times and different locations such that we can be more accessible to the community and various individuals within the community, we may be able to get more outreach. I also want to suggest that I think that maybe council might want to have a say in what those working groups are. And in participate or contribute to what those working groups potentially should be. If we have an issue that we're hearing a lot from, I mean, I see number one, contact your city councilors. We're going to get a lot of feedback too. And so we need to be able to participate in how we're structuring that, I think. That's kind of all the thoughts I have for now, but I'm liking where we're going with this. I do think that kind of as Councillor Buell was saying with our potential living document with code of conduct, it might be a little bit of a living process and we may tweak and structure,
Absolutely. I think that that's right on that. When you look at community engagement, it can't be something set in stone and says like, this is it, and it can never move from this. I think we will continue to modify and morph with what we see as things that are really working well. And maybe some avenues that we projected here that maybe didn't end up working very well. And then we can change and say, okay, but this one's been really working. So whether that's the bi-monthly to monthly, or whether that's working groups and, adding more onto those, I think we're going to learn a lot. And I think that's why it's really important specifically with here that we're really talking about is what are those key performance indicators that we're measuring so that we know what we're doing is achieving the goals that we've seeked out to do. And if we're not, finding out why we're not and how do we adjust to make those. So it's a very important part that you pointed out there, Mayor Pro Tem, that this is really, this is to be agile and that we're able to morph and move and make modifications as necessary.
Thank you so much for all the time and critical thinking and thoughtful thinking that you put into this. I personally see this as an ideal model. Of course, things will have to be tweaked and changed. I believe this is an ideal model. However, it's not in place right now. It's going to take a significant amount of time and effort to actually make this work the way we think it'll work. It's not going to start on May 15th up and running. We don't have the systems in place. We don't have the structure in place. We don't have the words out to the community. So I'm very concerned about that. And as I mentioned, when we talked about this last time, I think that a transition is really important. I think day one, we need to start with this. Absolutely. But I think if we let go of the Infrastructure Advisory Board, and if we let go of, and I do believe that the Natural Lands Board, Multimodal Board, and Parks and Rec Board should be combined for this process, for this transition. But if we let go of that, May 1st, May 15th, like that, it's a cliff. And I think that the public is used to a certain process. They'll feel like they've lost it. They won't have gained confidence in this process yet. And so I personally would prefer to see this process start as soon as possible in all the depth and I mean, it's stunning. You guys have done an awesome job. And I think that this in the long run will benefit our community in ways that we can't even imagine right now. But I'm concerned that we're dropping the other things too quickly and not giving the public a chance to get used to it, to become a part of it, to express themselves in a totally new and different way than they're used to. And I think we haven't taken the time to also transition and record that institutional knowledge that we currently have in those four boards and make sure that we know what we have there and that we know how to move it forward into like the Financial Advisory Board and into working groups and things like that. So I would prefer to see us take, I don't know if it's 6 months or a year. I don't know. I don't think it needs to be any longer than that by any means, but get this going, make it happen, but let's not, I think it's too big of a transition, too quickly. for the community. As an individual, it's probably fine, but as a community of 19,000 people and a city organization, when we don't have all these in place and we haven't practiced it and we don't know where the challenges are, where we're going to stumble, I'm a little concerned about that.
Do you wish to address that comment?
I'm not sure if from a staff perspective, there's much for us to address. I think that obviously the sooner the better, is absolutely well placed, but it's also part of getting the direction from council to make sure that we weren't completely off the mark with this. So having that set up is a one for us that we can continue to move on if that's a direction from the council. And I see more than 3 head shake nods to begin implementing this process. I think in regards to the timing with the boards and commissions, that's a council decision. That's the boards and commissions report to the council, and the transition period as to where that is going is for the council to give direction and decide.
Great. Councillor Bosman's, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do not support this direction, but that's the way it is.
All right, we will be having a detailed presentation. I know it may not be in your presentation, but I think that the question, if you are available to address what a transition might look like, what as you think about this. I appreciate that you've had to, you can't get too far down the road because you need to make certain that there's buy-in to what you're presenting, but some sense, not right now, but at some point, what the transition may look like. And because it's important, because this has in part been timed because of the, we typically recruit people in May. That was a change. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense to recruit people to a new board if it's going to be changed in some way. So I appreciate that. There may be some thinking about how to collect that historical knowledge. That's if council deems that appropriate. It just would be helpful to have that addressed in some way. I think to the council and to the community, what any, and I'm not going to put a time frame on it because I actually believe things can be done quicker than that. But I also want to address that. And I believe Councilor Buell has a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with Councilor Noseworthy and Councilor Baxter in some regards in terms of, yeah, I would love to see a plan as to like how, it will like a timeline of, and I think every board and commission is probably a little bit different too. There's some boards and commissions that might be super easy and some not. I mean, I know I just did the CEC retreat and we kind of brainstormed a plan like for the next year with how we could get it like over. And so I think that some are maybe on it and some maybe haven't quite. And so I just think that maybe a timeline, but I think it can be done quicker than 6 months. I think that, I don't think that it's that. I think you get it, you moving boards over, creating the new board, changing some ordinances, and then, yeah, getting the community, I think making them get on board quicker is okay too.
And with that too, I do recognize, like Mayor Noseworthy suggests, it is such a timing issue because of the potential. We would normally be applying in May, but the one thing that comes to my mind is typically with the boards and commissions, the summers are slower months. Typically. So it wonders if, if we could work to try to get that in place, by, let's just say August or yeah, I mean, then we're hopefully potentially with a new structure and system up and running by fall would be absolutely ideal. I don't think we want any more time than that.
I think time is of the essence, but it needs to be done well. But I also think that having that makes sense when things gear up. I think that that we should allow time to provide for historical capturing of knowledge, for informing people, for design, for providing numerous examples of the kinds of working groups you might have. And I will add to the IAB, having been that liaison, the value I see in this, particularly as the IAB is, they're tasked with doing things that are outside of their expertise because they seem to be the catch-all. And so here you could have working groups that addresses alleys, which may not be their specialty, but others could jump in. So I'm going to end. We've all had a chance to speak. I want to thank you. I'm going to say, I think you're hearing a variety of opinions on this matter, and we look forward to the full presentation later this evening. Thank you. And I appreciate the boards and commission members who attended or former elected officials who attended. Thank you for being willing to learn about this restructuring and the thinking behind it. And let me end by saying, I didn't realize there was an International Association for Public Participation, but I'm glad you guys are aware of it and are following best practices. Thank you. We will start at 5:30, our city council meeting.